today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in a time where sustainability talk is more than just buzzwords. The challenges surrounding environmental and social issues are metrics that businesses are tracking, and in some instances are tied back to growth KPI metrics such as revenue, employee retention, and most recently, investment viability. I think we are past the point of sustainability as a trend and moving toward an era where sustainability is imperative for business adaptability and growth. The Sustainability Perspectives is an effort by Perspective Strategies as a platform for industry experts to share their experience and expertise to drive the sustainability and ESG efforts in Malaysia. In the lineup today, we will share Malaysia's first ESG transparency report, the Global ESG Monitor Malaysia Regional Report 2022, carried out by Global ESG Monitor. This will be followed by a panel discussion to delve further into ESG transparency in Malaysia. So without further ado, let us welcome founder and principal partner of Perspective Strategies, Global ESG Monitor Regional Partner NDC, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, sustainability is a global issue, not a regional, and certainly not a local one. Malaysian companies must embrace this game-changing development and aspire to stand out as compared to our global peers. And all of you who are here this afternoon recognizes the importance of this strategic change. I think you coming here, ladies and gentlemen, especially to our friends from the media, indicates your seriousness and your conviction about this issue. Indeed, it's my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to the inaugural Sustainability Perspectives, a platform the team at Perspective Strategies conceptualized to showcase sustainability and ESG leadership and communication issues. Sustainability Perspectives is a mind space for us within the sustainability and communications industry to share expertise and experience in the area of sustainability and ESG. Here, I wish to recognize our event partners, U-Mobile and BZB Consult, for their support in making today's event possible. Thank you, Tiffany and team. Thank you, Prof. Bani and team. Your support has made this event possible. Ladies and gentlemen, there are numerous drivers for sustainability: global warming, inequality, socio-economic challenges, as well as transparency and governance. There is a lot going on in the world which is affecting many companies. Almost half of the assets under management are managed based on sustainability criteria. Europe is one of the most important trade partners for Malaysia. The European Union, for example, has implemented a framework and law requiring all mid and large-sized companies to report on progress regarding ESG criteria as of the fiscal year 2024. This law applies also to foreign companies with a subsidiary in the EU or making more than 150 million euros of revenue in the EU. Europe is one of the most important trade partners for our country. This is in addition to other jurisdictions enhancing their ESG requirements. For example, the SEC in the USA, and even here in Malaysia. Bursa Malaysia had announced numerous enhancements on sustainability reporting. After all, sustainability reporting has been mandatory for all Malaysian public listed companies since 2016. And the Employees Provident Fund, Malaysia's largest institutional investor, had announced that it will evolve from an ethical to a sustainable investor. It hopes to be fully ESG compliant by 2030 and climate neutral by 2050. We must embrace sustainability and ESG wholeheartedly. After all, sustainability is the new profitability, and green is indeed the new digital. Ladies and gentlemen, Perspective Strategies established a dedicated strategy and sustainability practice last year. It is part of our initiative to extend and enhance our consulting services. We realize that our push for a purpose-driven narrative with our clients requires that we drive and steer conversation on sustainability, ESG, and transparency. It's easy for people and brands to talk about having purpose, but it's not an easy journey to make it real. It takes guts and grit to manifest brand purpose and values into the real world. And that requires authentic leadership, not just talk. Important issues such as ESG requires people and organizations to take real, measurable actions to make it work. Today, the sustainability and ESG agenda dominates discussions in boardrooms. ESG commitment must be at the heart of an organization. Ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to partner the Global ESG Monitor. The Global ESG Monitor demonstrates purposeful leadership by showcasing companies' efforts to enhance the transparency of their ESG work. We want to share this global benchmark with Malaysian companies as part of our commitment to offer authentic communication solutions, especially in the area of sustainability. We must realize that the transparency of our ESG reporting is critical to inform and engage stakeholders. They need to know and appreciate the progress of our efforts to be responsible for our environmental, social, and governance actions. It is important to note that ESG, the Global ESG Monitor, measures transparency. It does not evaluate the business models or assess sustainability performance. Do allow me to thank our partner, Michael Digerman and Ariana Hofstetter, the co-founders of the Global ESG Monitor. I must thank Michael and Ariana for their confidence in Perspective Strategies, appointing us as the exclusive Malaysia regional partner for the Global ESG Monitor. We have had many conversations while in our various meetings, including while we're in Singapore, we're in Europe, and so on. So this is the fruition of the hard work that we've put together. Shortly, I will hand over the session to Michael and Ariana. Do allow me to introduce you to them. Ariana is the co-founder, head of research of the Global ESG Monitor. Ariana has more than 15 years of experience of market research. Her main areas of interest are sustainability research, as well as reception and learning behavior in an increasingly digitized world. Since 2019, she is co-initiator and scientific partner of the Global ESG Monitor. Ariana is the mastermind and brains behind the Global ESG Monitor. Michael is the co-founder of the Global ESG Monitor and founder of Cometis AG. Since 1998, he has gained a wealth of experience across the entire spectrum of investor relations. Michael has a long-standing network of contacts to media, analysts, fund managers, and many opinion leaders in the financial community. He was involved in over 250 IPO, M&A, IR, and ESG advisory projects. Michael also co-authored numerous specialist publications, including the bestseller 100 Financial Ratios, with more than 300 copies sold. Once again, on behalf of the team at Perspective Strategies, thank you for being here with us. Do have a productive learning session in the next hour. Thank you. Over to you, Michael and Ariana.
Thank you, Andy. And welcome from my side as well. It's a great pleasure to be here and speak to you. And I'm honored to have such a great audience for us in the room to present the results. So let's just jump right into the topic. I mean, you said it, Andy, the main key drivers for sustainability needs of corporations are number one, global warming, and number two, the global inequality. And on this slide, you see that the pressure is coming from various stakeholder groups. Now, the IGOs, like the World Bank or the United Nations, have probably a different view on information needs than somebody from the supply chain. And obviously, an NGO like Greenpeace would probably have different information needs than an asset manager like BlackRock. And so for companies who want to stay in business and comply to the law and even be financeable, they need to report on their progress on ESG. On the next slide, you see our journey. So we wanted to know what are actually corporates reporting on this issue. So 3 years ago, we started in Germany analyzing what the big German companies report on sustainability topics. And because we really want to find out what the benchmarks are in order to advise smaller and medium-sized companies as well. And also to provide the large companies benchmark information for their reporting. And in 2021, we increased that sample to also research European companies, US companies, and Australian companies. And in the last year, 2022, we expanded the survey to monitor many more companies in Asia, including Malaysia and the Hang Seng and the S&P 50 Asia. So why do we do all this? On the next slide, you see that we really do this in order to help companies improve their sustainability practice and reporting. And for them to do that, they need information. They need benchmarks. They need to start and need to get an angle on where to start and where to look at. So how do we do that? On the next slide, you see what we analyze, and I will go into the methodology now. So we really analyze the integrated information in the annual report about sustainability, so-called integrated non-financial information report. And then we also analyze the separate ESG report from the companies. We do not go into Twitter channels, marketing websites, or any special interest publication from a corporation. We chose those two publications because sooner or later, this is where every CEO and CFO or board will be held liable for. Let's dive a bit more into the methodology on the next slide. It's a bit more complex, but we've chosen this graphics to show that everything is interconnected with each other. And what you see is that we divided it into dimensions of transparency, which is balance, comparability, accuracy, timeliness, reliability, and relevance. And we also defined principles of that issue, of that topic, which is sustainability context, stakeholder inclusiveness, materiality, strategy, responsibilities, standards, and risks. And all this is merged into the topics planet, people, governance, and prosperity. And we chose to use this terminology based on the World Economic Forum. Now, we built that questionnaire, that methodology, which is 184 questions actually, and more than 800 data points on each company. And we built that questionnaire working together with the largest fund managers on the planet. We analyzed almost every ESG rating out there. We looked at so many questionnaires coming especially from retirement funds who are long-term investors. But we also talked to the NGOs and to the IGOs. We looked at the frameworks that are out there. And this is how we came up with that methodology, because this is what we believe companies need in order to benchmark themselves, to build or evaluate their reporting. Now, I suggest we go to the next slide and I hand over to Ariane, who is the mastermind of the methodology. And let's go into the results.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, audience. I enjoy really the opportunity and your interest in our results. Sustainability is a subject really close to my heart because me being a mother, it's crucial for the future of our planet and the society. And for me being a researcher, I enjoy the interdisciplinarity of the topic that encompasses so many aspects. Sustainability makes us learn, and because it brings constantly new developments, advances, and challenges that we need to consider. And speaking about learning, when we look at the results, you can see the GEM Assay transparency score for the FBMKLCI here. It's 54 points, and the maximum score was 100 points. So what we see is that that the FBMKLCI has a good achievement, but there's still room for improvement, which is the black bar here. I would like to show you some details explaining where the FBMKLCI is already very transparent and where the companies could consider to provide their stakeholders more information. But first, I would like you to understand the results in more detail. Thank you for switching. And on the left side, you see the distribution of achieved scores by quartiles. As I said, there was a maximum of 100 points available, and we divided the scale into 4 quartiles. And what you can see on the left side is that there are no major outliers in the first quartile. That's the light green section, 100 to 75 points. And if you go to the other end of our scale, you can also see that there aren't any outliers in the last quartile, the dark green section, 0 to 24 points. 70% of our sample is in the second quartile, 74 to 50 points. And since the spectrum is so broad, we show you the right side where we divided the scores in increments of 10 points. Here we can see that 60% of the companies lay above our average of 54 points and 40% are under this average, having the chance to be more transparent, to deliver more information in the future, also in order to meet the global sustainability standards. By doing so, these companies can not only improve their sustainability performance, but also enhance their competitiveness and appeal to international investors and consumers who are increasingly demanding sustainable products and services. Next slide, please. Again, you see our color scheme and the total ranking of the 30 companies we had in the sample. The left column shows you the global rank, the second column, the regional rank, and then you see the companies' names and the scores they have achieved. The FBMKLCI includes the biggest and most successful companies in Malaysia. And when analyzing the ranking of the 30, it is important to again note that we are not measuring their business models. It's their transparency scores we are looking at. And based on our analysis, you can see that we have some companies who made already significant progress in disclosing their sustainability performance, while others have still room for improvement. On the very top, we have Press Metal Aluminium Holdings, Tenega Nacional, and Petronas Chemical Groups. Next slide, please. So far, we have seen scores and we have seen percentages, and we are now going to look at some scores. And to make it easier and more comparable, we have divided, or we have converted all possible points into percentages. So for all dimensions and everything I will show you now, there is a maximum of 100 points available. Here you can see the transparency dimension, which Mike already has introduced to you. And if the quick calculators build the mean here, you will notice that the average matches the overall results. But we have also 2 bands towards the middle. The middle is the less transparency part in our scale. And you can see its accuracy and reliability. Shortcomings in accuracy dimension mean that the companies have not yet sufficiently presented or disclosed their KPIs and calculation formulas. And for shortcomings in reliability, we have included 2 examples here on the right. And we think that these are striking because they illustrate a phenomenon we can see in the overall results for this index. There's a lack of detail when it comes to specific commitments. In this case, we have 73 companies who formally commit in their reports that they stick to reliable and transparent data, but only 57 expressing this will by having their reports audited. The non-financial section audited, I should add. Next slide, please. Those are the principles Mike already introduced to you, and we have decided to include these principles because they show how companies choose what to report on and not. And this includes strategic instruments like stakeholder inclusiveness or double materiality or the ESG strategy, But it also includes sustainability context, because I need to know which markets, for example, are served, or how big the company is in terms of employees, to understand the numbers which are following. We need to know more about risks, and we need to make sure that the reporting follows certain standards in order to be comparable. And we need to know how responsibles are organized in the company. So here I would like to point out materiality and responsibilities, because in the light of the forthcoming European legislative changes, as Andy has already pointed out, there will be much more coming in these dimensions. Companies will need to report more on double materiality. They need to show that they are using risk management methodologies, and they need to set out clear responsibilities. And as Andy also said, what does Europe have to do with Malaysia? Europe is one of the major investors in Malaysia, and it requires all non-European companies with a turnover of 150 million or a branch or subsidiary in Europe to comply with European standards. Next slide, please. Hand over to Mike.
Yes, and not only that Europe is a large investor into Malaysia, I had the pleasure to visit Kuala Lumpur last year, and I must say it's a beautiful country, and we met very many friendly people and very interested people too in that topic. And like Ariana said, materiality is a huge issue, and actually to do a materiality assessment for a corporation is the heart of every sustainability effort a company can do. And when we look at our research, the findings are that 90%, so 27 out of 30, do report on the implementation of a structured materiality process. And if you dive in a bit deeper, but only 67% of those provide a list of their stakeholders. And I will come back later to why this is so important. But then only 37% describe how they determined their stakeholders. And you see that actually the graph is going down. And therefore the transparency is lacking, also the detail. That's something we find out in many topics. And those are just statistics and data. But if you look at the bar chart below, you see the quality information that is lacking. So it's a very small font, so you may not be able to read it, but it shows what we are looking at. So for example, Andy said it's mandatory to disclose ESG information since 2016 in Malaysia. So therefore we look at information like what's the year of the data of the collection? What's the engagement method the company used? And you see that that's very intransparent for a stakeholder to get this information. And unlike in financial reporting, there are no clear rules out there what you have to do and what you do not have to do. But the stakeholders, and this is what we learned talking to the frameworks, talking to the rating agencies, they look into this kind of details and then give points, and they do judge on your business model. So let's go to the next slide, because materiality is the basis for every ESG strategy. And again, you see the graph is going down if you dig deeper. So 87% of the companies provide an overview of their strategy, of their ESG strategy. But only 73% disclose sustainability goals, and only 67% prioritize those goals. And only 37% explain why these goals have been prioritized. Now, picture this: you want to enter a new market, and you have somebody write a business plan on entering that new market, and they wouldn't prioritize any goals. Most likely, nobody in the boardroom would allow that then to happen or to give money into that venture. And therefore, it shows where the room for improvement are. But obviously, it's not that easy, because you really have to know what the actions are and why you prioritize those. After the strategy, which is built on ESG criteria, and we will dive into that now, showing you on the next slide. We start with environmental, with our environmental scoring. You see that the Malay Stock Exchange Index has reached 55 out of 100 points in the region of planet. And you see on the right-hand side some selected categories that we looked at. And I will go into climate in a second, but I want to point out that I was surprised that there's so little transparency on the water usage in Malaysia. Because from what I learned is that the country is still very active in agriculture. So therefore, water is a very important aspect to look at and to report on. Same for waste. But let's dive into the next slide and go into what we found for climate. So we have researched and found that Malaysia, the Malay government has stepped up and said we want to reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030. Now that's the requirement or the regulation by the regional government or by the Malay government. But then when we look on the right-hand side, you see that only 70% state that they intend to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And only 30% of the companies we analyzed identified their most important sources for emissions. And then only 23% of the companies clearly committed to the goals of the Paris Agreement, which defines to set the level at 2% or actually 1.5% warming. But only very limited companies commit to that goal. But sustainability is not only environmental, it's also social. So please, let's go to the next slide. And you see that the scoring is quite low when it comes to the social aspects of the category people or social. And on the right-hand side, again, you see some selected subcategories. We will go into all of them on the next slide. And supply chain, I'm going to start with, is so important because the Malay industry or economy is very much based on also international trade. So you are part of a supply chain, and you guys do have a large supply chain. But when you look at what the companies report on, only 70% describes a supply chain. That means 21 out of 30 companies describe it and 9 do not. And only 37% monitor the suppliers on environmental issues, for example, through surveys, audits, or visits, or questionnaires. So you see, supply chain is a huge issue, especially when you look again to Europe. The European Union is planning to implement a law on a supply chain transparency. So therefore, every company doing business here will have to describe their supply chain in detail. This is already in place in Germany, and it is affecting a lot of information requests along all the suppliers and vendors of German companies. And so it's, again, what is there to report? It's, for example, the geographic location, the types of suppliers engaged, the total numbers of suppliers engaged, or industry-specific characteristics of the supply chain. But this is just one part. Let's go to the other part, which is employees and human rights. You will see on the next slide. And so human rights, you find that 83% of the companies reported that they provide information on strategies, measures they pursue to protect human rights. So that's good. But again, it can't be just a statement that we want to protect human rights. Stakeholders nowadays want to know more detail. What do you do? And only 47% disclose the risks for incidents, for example, of child labor or forced labor. And only 27% disclose a strategy or measures they take to prevent forced or child labor. Now, again, if you are a customer and want to make a decision on a business relationship and this kind of information is missing, I'm not sure if you can really make a decision on whether to buy that T-shirt or something else where cotton may be in and labor, may be included or not. And on the right-hand side, employee rights. There's definitely room for improvement in the reporting. And obviously, you can only report what you have the processes for. So we analyzed that 30% provide information on targets and or planned achievement periods for compliance with employee rights. But only 37% state the ratio of base salary to total ratio for each employee category by gender. This is, for example, a requirement by the Global Reporting Initiative that they want this kind of transparency. And 0% provide information on salary and ethnicity. And only 7% provide information on salary and age groups. This is all requirements from the frameworks and is also rated by the rating agencies. So therefore, we've touched now materiality, strategy, environmental and social aspects. And I'm going to hand over to Ariane, and she's going to talk about governance.
Thank you. Again, our scheme you know by now. On the left side, you see the total score for governance, 54 points, with a gap of 46 points. And then when we look at the right side, we see that we have a high score in governance structures. So what the FBMKLCI does really well is to show the structure and compositions of their highest governance bodies. Where they lack detail, again, is in demonstrating the effectiveness of their governance structures. So to give you an example, when it comes to the highest governance body in reviewing the effectiveness of the organization's risk management processes in relation to economic, environmental, and social issues, the numbers drop to 1/3 of the companies which report on this. Only 20% include when it comes to the frequency of the highest governance body reviewing economic, environmental, and social issues and their impacts, risks, and opportunities. And less than 10% of the companies make specific disclosures and report a total number of critical concerns to the board. When we compare this governance score of 54%, then we see that the FBMKLCI lands in 5th place behind China's Hang Seng with 55 points in this area and ahead of Australia's ASX 50 with 51 points. And I tell you this because this is our last slide. If we compare the overall result of the FBMKLCI with all the 10 indices we looked at, you can see the average is 55 points, that the index is on average 1 point below, and that it's on par with the Dow Jones and a little bit in front of the ASX 50. This middle range in the international comparison shows that the index has much achieved, but there's still room for improvement. And I hope that with all the details we have showed you in the last 20 minutes, there is a lot to discuss about, a lot to think about, and some ideas how companies could improve their reporting and how they could give more details to their stakeholders and make sure that their stakeholders have all the information they need and understand everything they need by having enough context, enough detail, and enough proof of what is said on strategies and goals those companies have. Thank you.
Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael and Ariana, for the very useful insight and for the collective effort to steer the conversation on sustainability, ESG, and transparency in Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, you can actually download the Global Monitor Malaysia Regional Report, and you can do so by scanning the QR code, which we'll share on screen shortly. Right now we can take Michael and Ariana can take questions from the floor. Please state where you are, your name and where you're from, and yeah.
Hi, my name is Bharat, very much from Kuala Lumpur. My question is, how do we benchmark against either Asia, Southeast Asia, or global? Could you hear my question?
Can you just repeat the last part, please?
Yeah.
No, I was asking if you were to benchmark against our neighbors, where does Malaysia stand? And I leave it to you to decide who our neighbors are. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will start, and then Ariana can probably jump onto it. So what we did is we did not analyze Malaysia against Singapore, for example, or Vietnam. So we have analyzed the Hang Seng in China. We have analyzed the ASX in Australia, and we can provide this comparison for everything you saw in detail. And we can even break down the information on the company level and say, this company is compared to this company, performs on that level. And then we have looked onto the European side. So we analyzed Germany, Poland, Romania, and we have chosen the Euro Stoxx 50 as a benchmark for Europe. And then we have analyzed in North America the Dow Jones and the S&P 50 USA. So for this year, we had a total of 10 indices where we can compare country by country or indice by indice.
I would like to add, if we look at all the indices we had from Asia, we had the S&P 50 Asia, we had the Hang Seng, and we had the FBMKLCI. And when you remember what we just showed you as a last slide, all the three indices are kindly doing the same or achieving the same average, with the FBMKLCI 54 points, S&P Asia 56 points, and the Hang Seng 57 points. So it's kind of the same level. And if you are interested to learn more about neighbors, then I would invite you to look at the S&P 50 Asia, because this index assembles companies from different countries in the Asian region.
So are you saying it's not a cause for concern? It is average? Is that
no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that. I would say to be on average shows that you have done already a lot of things in order to meet the average. But you see, when we talk about averages, the average is built by the best ones. They rise the level a little bit, and by the lowest one or the bad ones, which lower the level. So to have an average gives you some kind of orientation, but it's not the height the companies should just jump. We recommend to look at the best, to orientate upwards, not downwards, because the pressure, as we showed in the beginning of our presentation, comes globally. And this pressure has high demands on the companies. And as I said, it's a learning process. Those demands will increase. And therefore, the demands will also increase. And therefore, we recommend to orient upwards.
Okay, we can take one more question before we proceed. You can actually ask more questions during the panel discussion later, after this. Okay. Thank you very much, Michael and Ariana. And well done to the companies that has leaped forward in shaping their ESG initiatives over the years. Next, we will continue with a panel discussion on ESG transparency in Malaysia. Joining us are Michael Digelman, co-founder of the Global ESG Monitor, and Ariana Hofstetter, co-founder and head of research of the Global ESG Monitor. NDC Perspective Strategies, regional partner of the Global ESG Monitor, Dr. Nurmazilah Mazan, member of IFRS Foundation Integrated Reporting and Connectivity Council, and IR Dr. Muhammad Fazil Muhammad Siam, head of corporate strategy and sustainability Tenaga Nasional Berhad.
Thank you very much for being here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the team at Perspective Strategies and the Global ESG Monitor, welcome to the panel discussion session. I know Zurina cut short the questions. That's not the end. We have plenty of time to ask questions right now. This is the panel discussion. We'll kick off with some questions between us, but then we will definitely open the floor for further questions if you have on ESG transparency issues in Malaysia, as well as what were the findings of the Global ESG Monitor. Right. As you have seen moments ago, Micah and Ariana unveiled the results of the Global ESG Malaysia Regional Report. Don't forget, you may download the report. The QR codes are around the room, and we will also flash it out later. Right. Of course, as part of the panel, I'm delighted to have with us Micah and Ariana, who will join us virtually, the co-founders of the Global ESG Monitor. I'm also pleased to have with us Dr. Normazila Mazan, who has recently been appointed as a member of the IFRS Foundation Integrated Reporting and Connectivity Council. She was a former member of the Integrated Reporting Framework Board, as well as the former Chief Executive Officer of the Malaysian Institute of Accountants, MIA. Accountants and communications people. Usually we don't get along, but today we have her here. In MIA, she led and implemented the transformation of risk management system, governance enhancement, technology adoption, and branding. In addition, she was also involved in auditing and accounting regulatory function, including financial statement review, audit quality, and professional ethics. Her recent work revolves around integrated reporting, ESG, and the future of corporate reporting. Just right in her alley here. And of course, we have with us engineer Dr. Muhammad Fadzil bin Muhammad Siam, Head of Corporate Strategy and Sustainability, Tenaga Nasional Berhad. Dr. Fadzil obviously helped us to move the average score up of KLCI companies. Dr. Fadzil began his career in 1994 and has been working with TNB, undertaking various technical, leadership, and corporate strategy tasks. He was previously the Managing Director of TNB Research and currently the Head, Corporate Strategy and Sustainability of the Strategy and Ventures Division of TNB since 2020. He oversees the development of the TNB Sustainability Pathway 2050, which was announced in August 2021 and detailed further under the current TNB Energy Transition Plan. He has also been involved in various other focus areas, including power system, smart grid issues, power quality, battery energy storage, and renewable energy. Perhaps to kick off our discussion, we have seen the results of the Malaysia Leaderboard moments ago. Dr. Fadzil, let me congratulate you and your team at TNB for being on top of the leaderboard. Would you share with us your thoughts, now that you found out that you guys are on top of the leaderboard, and perhaps share with us what's the strategy and thinking behind why has TNB embarked on ESG reporting so seriously?
Thank you very much, Andy. It is indeed a surprise. That's why I'm a bit speechless at the moment. But nevertheless, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Very good afternoon, fellow panelists. In our case, of course, we are a bit surprised because when we look at our issue with regard to ESG, I think being a utility company, issue on E is actually one of the big challenges that we have to face, in terms of the environment. And that's why since 2017, we have started to report, to include our sustainability statement as part of our integrated annual report. And also we do publish a separate document to disclose our sustainability report. Now the intention is, we know, yes, there's a journey that we have to go through to address in terms of sustainability on the environment, social and governance. And that is something that cannot be achieved overnight. It is a journey. And that's why when I mentioned surprise, because I think we have done a lot to address in terms of disclosures, but we are not there yet. It is part of our journey. And we believe that is something that we need to work together in partnership and collaboration, because it's not just about the company. It is about the country addressing the climate change. So I think, Andy, let me just stop there. Well, thank you very much.
Right. Maybe then the next question is Dr. Normazila, being someone who is very involved in the reporting landscape in Malaysia. You saw the results. What are your thoughts? Any feedback? Even Michael and Ariana would be interested to hear your views with regards to this.
No sound. Testing. Can you hear me? Right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum, and thank you so much, Michael and Ariana. That was really a fantastic report. I'm very happy to read. I read the global report, I think, from, cover to cover, looking at the analysis and the results. So maybe I take a bit of one step back, looking at corporate reporting and why it's important. And now I sit as IRCC, where my role is to integrate and connect. So that's what I'm trying to do now. So looking back at reporting, and transparency has been the main, I think, narrative in any reporting. And the reason why we report, especially corporate report, and especially companies that are listed under FBMKLCI, is very important because you have many stakeholders. And stakeholders would like to know what is happening in the company. And as we know, if you're minority stakeholders, you're not involved day to day. And even if you're a board, you're not involved day to day, especially if you're non-executive. But this is where especially the shareholders, the investors, the mass investors would like to know what have you done and what's the story of the company moving forward and day to day. So this is where corporate reporting has evolved. And if you look back at how the corporate reports in Malaysia, I think back then when I was in public listed 1990s, is very much based on the set of guidelines and set of the mandatory information that we have to put, especially on the structure. So I'm not surprised that we've scored quite well under the governance structure. How many board meetings have we attended, and what's the pay disclosure, and who are the chairman, the background of the chairman, background of the board members. I think we've done that quite well based on your report. And that's very interesting as well. We've not demonstrated how that governance structure contribute to the effectiveness of how the company is being run. And we know very well board dynamics is very different, and board made that decision on the material items of the company. And ESG are now ranked high on the risk of any company. Yeah, the environment and social, and TNB is about environment perhaps, and it's also about social because it's being the GSC. So this is where report helps to communicate and helps each and every stakeholders to understand on the information that they need to know. So if you look at, say, if I can pick TNB, the investors, including government, would like to know, the critical information. And not only that, the public, the users, any one of you are not using electricity at all? I think we all do. So all of us, we want to know where is the company going forward in terms of the environmental, in terms of their decarbonization, in terms of their renewable energy, and what's the plan for the net zero 2050. So I was one of those who, since the announcement last year, trying to look at the roadmap of TNB for their decarbonization. I was always, searching for that information. So that's where corporate reports are very important, and that's what it means to each and every one of the people. And stakeholders comprise government, investors, the regulators, and each and every one of us. So that's where the connection is. And I think this report produced on transparency, something that is very, very good, very unique. And it is not just addressing what the investors want to see. It's addressing what every one of us, the public at large, wants to see. So on that remit, I think this is really a very good report. I would like to congratulate. And I'm very pleased to see that TNB, is one of the lead in this study. And I'm also very pleased to see that we are in the middle of those many countries that you have compared with. We are scoring 54. And I think because our journey has probably just started about a few years as compared to the global community. I think in some countries, the journey has been probably almost 10 years. But we've just started about a few years. And recently, our Bursa Malaysia listing requirement has just been amended. For the next 3 years, we're going to do more in terms of our disclosure. So we're scoring 54, which I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to move forward. So on that note, I think that's where I would like to start with.
Michael and Ariana, perhaps the first question to kick off our discussion from your perspective, how can the Global ESG Monitor, how can Michael, yourself, and Ariana, yourself, help Malaysian companies moving forward? You know, we know about this, but how do we take it forward?
So, thank you, Andy, and thanks for the feedback. I appreciate that. We can provide for each company the information we showed in very details. So if a company, let's say, wants to know how do I perform against my direct competitors or my peers in Europe or the best in class of the total sample, we can provide them that information. We call that a challenger report, and help them therefore, the teams within the companies to improve the reporting, but also the teams to show to their boards to say, look, we are scoring low in social or in governance, for example. We need to make decisions, which I can do because I'm not on the executive level. You're on the board level. So this is what we can provide. And then we have designed many tools on how to lead a company step by step through that road of progress. And I want to point out what already the other two speakers have said. It's a process. It's not a state. And therefore, I think one question from the audience was, do we have to worry being the midfield? Well, yes and no. Well, no, because you're already showing that there are good companies out there. And yes, because the pressure is huge. And I want to give you some examples. Andy said it in the beginning, referring to Bloomberg research, 50% of all assets under management, equity and debt, are managed under ESG criteria. So we see that here, and I'm working in the capital markets now for 25 years. I see that very large clients of us do not get appointments with investment companies anymore because of a lack of transparency in their reporting. We see, when you look at the media, you see boycotts from clients, from customers, that they do not agree with the business practice of those companies. We see more and more lawsuits that CEOs will be held responsible for not providing the right information or having not provided the process internally to comply with the laws coming up. And then there's one example I can give from a big food retailer here in Germany called Lidl. It's the Schwarz Group. It's a family-owned business. But they gave out a public statement saying that they will delist every supplier who's not net zero by 2030. So the pressure is coming from all sides. And therefore, yes, every company should understand that there's very urgent to act and be better. It's always about progress.
Right. Thanks, Michael. Anything else to add, Ariana?
I just want to add that we also have, since we have done this for some years now, a huge database of best practice examples, because what is often really hard for the companies is to understand how to comply to an disclosure or how to explain what they are doing. And also, if we look at rating reports, you see all the criteria, but often it's very difficult to understand what do they really ask from us. And here, those best practice examples we have collected can give good impulses to see how do other companies do this. What can we learn from them? We know from research it's more easy to learn from others and to deal with what is out there than to start from scratch. So that's also something we can offer.
And
thank you.
Let
Thank
me
you,
just
Ariana.
add to that, Andy, one last thing. We often get requests from companies listed on the stock exchange, and then the CFO comes to us and says, look, we do want to influence our ESG rating. And we designed software for that, to do that. But the first step is to analyze the reporting and analyze the weighting of the rating. And for example, if you score low in transparency of social issues, but MSCI or Sustainalytics is scoring in that sector social very high, you can do whatever you want. You will never influence your rating. And to be able to show that such a graph to your board makes a mindset changing, that they think, okay, look, we do have to make a change to stay investable. So that's a real value of that analysis we can provide to corporates.
Thanks, Michael. Perhaps, put Dr. Fadzil back on the limelight a little bit here. We saw TNB appearing on top of the leaderboard, but perhaps tell us TNB's journey, towards sustainability. For example, your sustainability pathway, and how reporting now is an integral part of this process.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I think number one, it is embedded as part of our business purpose. I think that's what drives Tenaga Nasional going forward. We have the aspiration to be the premier energy solution provider in Malaysia as well as in the region. Now, because of that, we look seriously in terms of the issue of sustainability, addressing in terms of ESG, and at the same time, we do realize the impact that we will make. Number one, being a GLC, how we actually support the country in terms of attracting the investment. How do we ensure in terms of the impact that we do towards the rakyat as a whole, to the people, to the community, our own staff, as well as at the same time, being a listed company to the investors as well. Now that's why, as mentioned just now, we look into this issue. We analyze how can Tenaga Nasional be a sustainable company, but towards that journey, how do we address, especially to undertake a responsible energy transition. Now that's why in 2021, we disclosed our sustainability pathway, detailing in terms of our journey to reduce our CO2 emission, and then how do we address in terms of the big issue that we have, the fossil fuel, the coal power plant, the commitment that we have done in terms of reducing the CO2 emission by 50% by 2030, and then there'll be no more new coal power plant in the making. Now, at the same time, we do realize we need to push towards renewable energy, and that's why strategically company has actually set a target to push another 8,000 megawatt into the system, and at the same time, not only in Malaysia, but also within this region. And we do understand that as we move forward, it is not simply just by addressing in terms of the fossil fuel, but there'll be new introduction in terms of new green technology. And that's why people have started to discuss in terms of how can we co-fire, for example, together with ammonia as we move towards hydrogen. And coming from the existing fossil fuel power plant, how can we capture in terms of our CO2 through carbon capture and utilization and storage. And I believe when we disclose this statement, people are asking, is this just merely a statement? Is this something that we are doing at the moment? And that's why, in terms of new technology, I think since the last 5 years, being the past MD of TNB Research, I can assure you that we have started within our R&D company, as well as with our university colleagues, to look in terms of the importance of various green technology, to push forward, so that it can be ready by maybe 2030, but we have to start the work now. That's in terms of green technology. But at the same time, I think Dr. Nomazia just now asked in terms of the detail of that pathway. And that's why last year we announced our energy transition plan. Because in our plan, we look at the granularity in terms of addressing what are the key pillars that the MB has to undertake at the moment, looking at the entire value system of supplying electricity to the customer. That's why we look in terms of pillar number 1, in terms of our generation, which I mentioned just now, moving from coal towards gas, towards other green technology, pushing towards renewable energy. At the same time, we do understand we are not just the only player in Malaysia. There are other players in terms of renewable energy. and how we can ensure to be that enabler, for example, within our grid network, so that all these RE developer can connect to our system and then can be transferred to the customer. So we do ensure our grid network, our transmission and distribution network to be modernized, digitalized, so that it can also enable RE sources to be connected to the system and supply to the customer. And when I mention about the customer, it is important that the customer must have the right services that they require, whether in terms of looking at the energy management within their own houses, their own plants and facility, how TMB can play that role through our other subsidiaries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have described in terms of the effort from the supply side coming from the generation. What about the customers, Andy? Because customers are the user, you, me, I, our kids. So that's why the importance of actually educating the public as a whole. And this is something that Tenaga Nasional has been working together with the ministry on a program, what we term as the Malaysia Energy Literacy Program, so that customer can be educated in terms of how we can reduce energy efficiently. Actually, energy efficient is the, in a way, the things that can be harnessed now efficiently, utilizing energy at home, at offices, within our facility, etc. Now, Andy, as we look into this, we address our pathway, we address in terms of our transition plan. At the same time, we do understand that to address all these key issues, it is important to work with the regulator, with the ministry in setting the right policy. That's number one. I mentioned in terms of education and awareness. The third one is in terms of the partnership and collaboration. Looking within our power sector is not enough. What about the oil and gas? At the same time, how we can actually work with other players to decarbonize the industry as a whole. For example, in terms of transportation. And that's why we have also discussed with the industry how TMB can actually push towards, for example, pushing in terms of electric mobility, electric vehicle. Not only TMB being the charger supplier, but to allow other players to come in. I think we welcome very much all efforts, not just by TMB, but other players as well, as we move towards addressing the sustainability, as well as to decarbonize the business. And that's why partnership and collaboration is very important. Andy, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for the sharing. I think it's important for us to know that. My next question maybe to Michael and Ariana, based on your experience from all over the world right now, is there a correlation between how reputable the companies are versus, the transparency score? How about size?
I would start here.
Yeah. Okay, over to you, Ariana.
I think if we, what we just heard from Dr. Maud Fazil shows us that reporting is displaying risks and opportunities, and that helps stakeholders to make those decisions and helps to contribute to reputation. Because if a company shows where the risks are and how it not only looks at sustainability from the risk perspective, but also from the opportunity perspective, what opportunities do we have to enter new markets, to give out new products, to win new clients, gives a multifaceted picture of the company and helps to build reputation if steered correctly. And by steering, I mean to follow the comply or explain principle, not to distort or overstretch information or only report on the good things, but have a very balanced reporting. That's why balance is one of the 6 dimensions we look at in terms of transparency.
Right, thank you. Dr. Normazila, maybe you can share some Malaysian perspective. You've worked with many corporate leaders who have actually done the corporate reporting. Is honesty the best policy? I'm sure you have heard in the room when you're doing reports, many will say, I don't think it's good to be transparent because I'll be under a lot more scrutiny. Do you face that kind of issues when you're doing reports with your clients and organizations? Yeah.
Yep. Actually, I conduct a lot of trainings on how to prepare integrated reports, and of course, I've had conversations with many corporate leaders and various companies, public listed. Actually, I've never had a question about not, how do we being honest. But one of the question that I always receive is about the extent of disclosure, especially if it involves like strategy. They are worried about competition. Yeah, so it's not about about being honest, but it's about competition that they're worried. So if they disclose too much, they think that our strategies will be perhaps taken away by our clients or emulated by the other competitors. Yeah, so that's where I think the questions came from. So I think from my engagement with many preparers, everyone trying their best to disclose, to be honest, to disclose, to be transparent. But one challenge that I face is about the extent, and also about conciseness. So one of the guiding principles of the integrated report is about being concise, and is the ability also to connect. So connectivity is very important. For example, if we want to see how much the governance, the directors and those charged with governance are actually driving value of the on the company's strategies. So we need to be able to see the flow between, coming from the composition of the board, the skill set of the board that guide the top management, where top management are driving their strategies, and at the end of the day, they are able to meet their target. So I'm trying to bring together in our reporting landscape right now, and even in your report, you have identified there are quite a number of reporting frameworks out there. For example, TCFD is one of the reporting framework that Bursa Malaysia is targeting for all companies to follow by 2025. And TCFD talks about metrics and target. So, and when we talk about metrics and target, data is a big important part, and it's very important. So, but some companies may not have the proper structure and system in terms of capturing the data. So just now, IR Fazil mentioned about the transition pathway for TNB. Next is for them to collect all the data regarding the CO2 reductions or methane reduction, the GHG reductions. And that involve, I think, a very comprehensive structure of data, and that involve everyone need to be working together, collaboration, not only collaboration with the internal people, but collaboration with the third party. So there was also in the report about Malaysian companies are not doing well under our supply chain. That could be under the what we call a scope 3 disclosure under GHG protocol. So scope 3 means the emission or carbon emission coming from your supplier. Yeah, for example, we purchase we purchase goods from our supplier, and our supplier are actually producing that with carbon emission. So that is about supply chain disclosure, and this is where companies are trying very hard. And I've seen in terms of the number of trainings that has happened for the last 1 year, and I've seen the interest level of the, especially the SMEs as well, and also the large companies in attending the training and trying to learn more and improve themselves, putting more progress in their reporting of ESG matters. So we've seen, I think, very good progress, very good response, and very good initiatives from the companies. And of course, it's a matter of time, it's a journey, and with the guidance and with the help, I think the quality will further enhance. Yeah.
And if I may add just one small point, honesty. I think our challenges is that as we disclose more, there'll be more questions. Yeah? So are we not supposed not to be transparent? No. In fact, this morning, at Tenaga Nasional, we conducted this top management risk forum attended by the top management as well as board members. I think similar question was asked, honesty, transparency. And I think the clear answer is no. We have to be transparent. Yes, there are challenges, but those are something that we have to address. And we have to disclose information required by the stakeholders as we move towards this journey. And I think there's a mention in terms of the emission. At the moment, TMB has published already Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And starting from this year, we will also go into Scope 3 for some of the elements. Thank you.
Well,
Can I just
I'm aware, but of course one of the findings in the report, for example, is that there are certain parts that Malaysian companies are a little bit more cautious. For example, as highlighted in the report, companies are more cautious in the respect of, for example, descriptions when it comes to the topic of age split, ethnicity, salaries. As you know, the ethnicity issue can be quite sensitive in Malaysia sometimes. So are these valid concerns? I mean, based on your experience, Dr. Mazila, because doing corporate reporting?
Actually, with regards to all this ethnicity, race, age, well, I think it shouldn't be something that companies should be very cautious of, because if we we go on the principle of merit, principle of DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, there shouldn't be something that we are very cautious of in terms of the disclosure, because I think each and every company, and from what I've seen, many companies they recruit based on the need of the manpower, and they look at the skill sets and the knowledge, and they go on proper HR recruitment process. So and this information should be disclosed and should be aligned to the purpose of a company. Yeah. So I always believe purpose is the main driver of any policies and procedures in the company. It is aligned and connected back to the purpose. So the purpose will determine how the companies recruit, how the companies actually execute their strategies. So I don't see why we should be cautious of disclosing all those information, because it goes back to the purpose of the company. So as long as there is alignment, with the purpose, and I think that shouldn't be something that we be cautious of.
Perhaps we can come back to asking questions, but maybe we'll open the floor for a couple of questions. If we don't get enough momentum, I'm more than happy to ask more questions. But maybe let's start. Yes, Frida.
Oh, okay, all right. So I just want to know, in the case of TM, I know it's a journey, but as a GLC, you have a lot of suppliers which are in the SME, in the whole supply chain, right? How do you plan to get them on board? Because that's going to be part of the story as well. So, I think just to understand how you're going to help support the SMEs in your supply chain.
Yep, thank you very much for the question. For Tenaga Nasional, not only that we in terms of the businesses that we have with our customers, but together with the vendors, thousands as you mentioned just now. And the journey is not just with Tenaga Nasional, but how do we work with the vendor and supplier as well. As I mentioned just now, we have published Scope 1, Scope 2, but not yet on Scope 3. But since last year, we have started to engage with, as part of our procurement and supply chain division initiative, we have engaged to our suppliers in terms of requirement. Our requirement, that's number one. Secondly, also not only creating awareness to our employee, but also awareness towards all the, including suppliers. What are the things needed to be addressed? Because there'll be implication in terms of new requirement that might have impact in terms of the material, the value chain, the price, etc. So we, together with the supplier, understand that this is part of the journey, something that cannot be decided overnight, but they must be on board in order to address this. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nat from GEM Malaysia. My question is probably more suitable for Michael and Ariane. I'm very curious as to, with rating agencies and fund managers right now, do they place more emphasis on transparency versus performance? So for example, a company fails to, maybe discloses their gender pay gap. They have a gender pay gap. Will they be penalized for that? Or will they be rewarded for even reporting that in the first place? Right now, what is the emphasis on? Thank you.
So I suggest I start because ESG ratings is one of my main core topics. So we realized that, and that's a criticism about the rating agencies, that their transparency about the weighting and the sources of their information is very low. So I cannot tell you, do you get more points if I say that or that? What they disclose is only the first layer of their weighting system. And everything behind that for the actual final result stays in the dark. So nobody knows. If you are in a sector like Tenaga is, for example, you may have a lower score because you are in the energy sector than if you would be 100% renewable. But that's something they do not disclose. However, they have, each rating agency has is also measuring transparency and gives scores. And we have learned that companies with a higher transparency score higher in their rating as well.
All right, any more questions?
Hi, my name is Amalina from New Straits Times. I actually have a question to Dr. Muhammad Fadzil, a follow-up to the earlier question about the supply chain and ensuring vendors actually take part in this whole ESG movement, right? So I would like to know, at least from TNB side, when it comes to waste management, like how are you involved, how heavily are you involved in the waste management plan, like turning the whole process into a green and more sustainable process, right? Because as we can see in the presentation earlier, the transparency level when it comes to waste management is still very large, right? So I would like to understand on TNB side, what's the challenge if you are able to disclose this to us?
I think maybe there are two questions. Number one, in terms of managing the risk. For Tenaga National, we look in terms of our strategic risk as well as our operational risk. In terms of strategic risk, ESG, yes, is part of our strategic risk. We have identified what are the things affecting our risk and how do we actually, the approach in terms of managing that risk. Yeah? At the same time, there are also operational risks, which include things like waste management. Now, to give you example, for our, we have a number of power plants, and the question is in terms of, I think, emission, you already know, how do we actually address in terms of managing the CO2 emission. That's number one in terms of carbon management. Secondly, in terms of water, that is something I think is already highlighted previously. But of course, in terms of our power plant, how do we actually measure, manage in terms of the water itself? And the third point is something, it's related to waste management, which you have asked just now. Those are areas of opportunity. There are things actually at the moment has been undertaken, but I'm sure there are also other areas within that waste management throughout our entire business that can be undertaken further. Something has been undertaken, but it's an area that we can do further to address, not only, for example, within our generation plant, but what about our rest of our operation, including our subsidiaries. Yep.
Yeah, my name is Kian Ming, former Member of Parliament. Couple of questions. First question is to Michael and Ariane with regards to possible political consequences of more transparent disclosure. So long term, it may be something that's positive for companies. But in the short term, in your experience, have you had instances whereby disclosure would invite certain scrutiny from a political standpoint that may be detrimental to companies in the short term? And I'll give you an example. Right now in Europe, for example, some certain companies, if they disclose that it's difficult for them to move away from supply chains that's related to Russia, it may be problematic for them in terms of the political perception. So that's one question. Similar question to our esteemed panelists, including Andy. More disclosure in terms of, for example, the pay packages of CEOs as well as chairmen and board members among the listed companies in Malaysia may be good, in terms of transparency, but it may invite political scrutiny in terms of the man on the street saying, why is the chairman of TNB getting paid X amount more than the average wage, for example. So from a PR management perspective, Andy, how would you advise companies to try to manage this kind of political sort of like feedback that comes as a result of greater transparency? Thank you.
Michael, you may want to answer the first question first. It gives me time to think.
For the political influence on transparency issues. So what we have seen through the Russian war in Ukraine, that companies in Germany who still had business in Russia have faced public pressure, and it was a big job for the communication teams and the management, A, to make a decision, and B, to bring it into context. And this is why we look on all issues that we analyze in ESG communications on the context, because this needs to be evaluated. And I give you an example, which is if you are in the energy sector, and I can only say that I'm happy to hear what Tenaga has made, that they stopped bringing in new coal plants. But this is a dilemma from the business model, right? Because the coal plant is pretty profitable, but they made decisions on changing that and looking into other sources of making energy. And to actually state that publicly takes courage. And it needs to be brought into context. And I think that unlike short-term political decisions, the ESG field is a very long-term perspective, because we are on the road to progress to net zero, and to keep the big picture in mind, to leave the planet behind for the next generations in a nice shape. So I hope that answers the question. What we see that the political decisions being made is important. In Germany, we have the supply chain law, which is coming also through the European Union. But the main pressure we see is coming from the markets. So the capital markets and the clients. Many young generations here do not want to work with companies who do not disclose certain information. And I can say that I see from the capital markets that many of my clients have had issues to even get appointments with fund managers talking about the equity story. So the pressure outside the regulatory bodies from the government is huge. And the regulatory laws coming from the government will bring liability issues to the management, which I think is good and should be more faster on a global scale.
Right. It's a very interesting question. And YB, if I can, Dr. Ong, if I can probably share in terms of my observations. I've actually reviewed a lot of reports, integrated reports, ESG reports from all over the world. And those that always capture my attention in terms of their transparency are those from South Africa. So if you know in South Africa, integrated report is mandatory, and it's because of their King 4 corporate governance code. And the way it's being disclosed is very interesting. The chairman or the board remuneration committee will disclose about how they retain the CEO talent. So it's not just about the disclosure about the pay package, but they mentioned that when they look for a CEO, they're looking for all these skill sets, and they actually source for a very good CEO, and then how they retain the CEO, and they narrate and they explain, they articulate with this kind of CEO that we would like to retain to run the company, we're giving him this package. Yeah, so sometimes that we fail to see in terms of why he is a CEO, why he or she is a CEO. But sometimes we also can see the company that actually lost that good CEO has may have the ability to continue, I think, because of the policy and procedures are in place, but they may lose the innovative part. Some CEOs bring to companies great minds and that bring the company above the peers. So this is very interesting style of disclosure. They disclose, but it is from the board, remuneration and nomination committee that disclose the talent, the retention, and the pay package. So it's well articulated. So I think with that, it should, I think there would be no qualms in disclosure, in being transparent, because there's a justification why is being the pay package is being modeled as such. So that is transparency. I think transparency comes with articulation and comes with your ability to explain. That also maybe with regards to your supply chain and your ESG roadmap, you need to be able to explain. So this also I've seen during the pandemic, many companies lost its value because they lost the business. But they explain in their annual report that says that we lost this business, we closed it down, but we are creating a new value for the shareholders. They're being transparent. And the other reason of being transparent and to explain it properly, because market can already see. We all can analyze. Now it's really a transparent with social media and people can just get the data. So you explain why you have lost that business, but what's your plan ahead? So most analysts, they want to see your plan ahead. It's about the future outlook. So one of the principle is about, future outlook and what's your plan. That's normally how the market, what the market would like to see and how the market react. So that's a bit of, my observation. Thank you.
I forgot to buy Ken Ming a cup of coffee. That's why he's asking me such a challenging question in a big forum like this. Can we take it off? But I think to also answer Ken Ming's point of view from a communications point of view, I think just like ESG, sustainability reporting is a journey, communication is a journey itself. I think in the context of Malaysians' social media and communication landscape, it's quite sad that certain news are put out there without context to it. So for example, I think the whole GLC pay package and so forth, I think obviously it goes hand in hand with GLC reforms as well. So for example, are board members, chairmen and CEOs of GLCs, are they accountable for the results of the companies? I think if we explain the context of the accountability towards their performance, and it's a performance-based kind of compensation, I think there will be more appreciation and understanding. But of course, I think it's a journey. I think the Malaysian public also needs to understand the context. A 30,000 salary can be very big to a man on the street. But from a CEO package point of view, it's actually a very low package. So I think these are all things that perhaps, as part of GLC reform, there's a need from the government to explain. GLCs are not government departments. They are, linked companies. They have profits. They have, accountability in terms of performance and so on. But I think it's a total picture and it's a lot of work. I'm glad that I don't do political PR. All right, thanks. Any more questions? Yes.
Andy purposely don't want me to ask.
Then. Okay. Then next is Bani. All right.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Andy. Good afternoon, panelists. My question is for Michael and Ariana. Thank you for this Global ESG Monitor, by the way. It's a good effort. I noticed that from what I understand, a lot of the studies are based on more objective details of the matters. You've got the breadth of things, you're looking at more details of the matters. But how would you reconcile, or how do you plan to reconcile more subjective things like transparency's greenwashing? As been an example, Shell and BP, for example, where they suggest that they will be net zero by 2030, and that the annual report says they are not legally bound by those promises. So that's a lot more subjective. that's a lot less detailed in terms of items that you can tick off boxes. How does GEM plan to reconcile that in future? Thank you.
I would start, Mike. We try to objectize our methodology as much as possible by explaining how we break down terms like abstract terms like transparency or principles and explain this. And the Global ESG Monitor is an iterative research project. So that means that we are learning from each analysis phase and also from discussions like today, what to take into consideration. So what we did, for example, last year was to start to include the first performance indicators, like writing down the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions of the companies we have evaluated. What we were dreaming of was to publish how much CO2 emission an index is emitting. But what we learned is that when it comes especially to scope 2 emissions, I'm not even starting about scope 3, about scope 3 emissions, most of the companies did not even give the calculation format. So it makes a difference if you calculate location-based or market-based. That brings total different numbers. So for the Hang Seng, we tripped over a third Chinese-specific way of calculating scope 2 emissions. And then since we looked at various reports, we also found differences in company reporting, like a different number in the annual report than a different number in the separate report. So we were aware that what we planned, measuring a performance indicator, was not enough. So for the next round, we will adapt our methodology in terms of performance indicators, include more performance indicators, and also include more questions around those differences we noticed. Another thing we noticed is how hard it is to find those reports, and that it's also very difficult to make information accessible in the reports. So that's why we decided to also include for the next round one new transparency dimension, which will be accessibility of reports. And we already have operationalized this dimension in order to be more complete. I hope this answered the question. Or do you have anything to add, Mike?
Well, I just want to, because the gentleman raised the topic of greenwashing. Now, we are measuring transparency and we do not judge on business models. What we found is that if companies are very intransparent, often they haven't made management decisions yet in order to be able to report on certain stuff. But we want to enable stakeholders to make a decision on a business relationship. And if somebody is intransparent, it is very unlikely a stakeholder can make an informed decision. Now, if somebody is very transparent and lies, we cannot measure that. And I mean, there are many scandals around the globe. I'm just, thinking about Enron in the US a few years ago. Nobody knew that they were just, playing games. That's something which will be found out afterwards. But in order to avoid greenwashing or disclosing false information, that's something I would refer to the political people in charge to make sure that those reports being published have to be audited. And the auditors should have stronger regulations on looking more detailed into the correctness of the information. And then we come in and measure how transparent are those companies there at this point of time.
All right, thank you, Michael. We'll take one last question from. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, since we are talking about assurance, and also I think part of the result is the companies in Malaysia, not many have engaged assurance provider. So I would like to share a bit about this audit or assurance, since that's where I came from. Well, if you look at the audit of financial statements, the rigor of the audit is much, much higher as compared to assurance given on ESG information. Yeah, it's a different standards that are being used. And the reason why, because audit in financial statement is mandatory under the Companies Act 2016. Yeah, and therefore audit of financial statements is what we call reasonable assurance. They look at, you know, the whole business model and they look at the financial statements. So the assurance on non-financial reports, and this is, I think, the ESG monitor look at non-financial report. The assurance is what we call limited assurance. There are two types. Either is provided by internal auditors. If you look at internal auditors, how they look at it is that before the report is being published, they check that, you know, whatever numbers are being supported by internal documents and all that. So those are internal auditors who work with the company. But otherwise, they engage and independent assurance providers, and mainly companies will engage the big firms, accounting firms, but these assurance on ESG information, they call it limited assurance, and it's not holistic for the whole report. They will choose, you know, the item, the management, the directors will choose, we would like assurance on these metrics or target or this item. For example, assurance on carbon, assurance on water, and then they will just look at how those information are presented and prepared, and they look at the evidence given by the company. So it's called limited assurance, and in short, it is less rigorous than the audit of financial statements. And the standards are also evolving. At the moment, the Malaysia Institute of Accountants are looking at enhancing the assurance standards for ESG information. So that's a bit of explanation there. Thank you.
Maybe last question from Bani.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, afternoon. First of all, I'm really glad to see that we are looking more and more into the social and governance part of ESG. For many years, we've been pushing forward communications with regards to the importance of social and governance. My question goes to is with regards to governance aspect. Is it all about reporting, or when will there be a time that we will look at the actual doing of governance with regards to governance? You can report about, you've done this for transparency, you've done this with regards to integrity and whatnot, but will there ever be a time, or is that possible? Is there a way, for example, interviewing stakeholders with regards to what you have done, what you have actually done, related to the greenwashing bit, but this is slightly different, yeah? So maybe someone can give me an answer with regards to that.
Right. So if you ask me, out of E, S, and G, G is the main one. G is the main one. So because the board is ultimately responsible for the, you know, whatever the companies are involved in, and also the directions of the companies moving forward. And just for example, if you look at the company's risk and materiality, in say if they violated the environmental law or they violated the human rights, the Employment Act, the directors will be caught first. So that's why it's not about reporting. I think that's a very good question. I remember the words by Mark Carney of the Financial Stability Board when they introduced TCFD. It's not all about reporting, but reporting trigger the action. Because they have to report, they need to start somewhere. Yeah, because if you have done nothing, you have nothing to report. So because of the need to report, they trigger action, hopefully, because that's, I think, the triggering factor that try to motivate people. So, and that, yeah, that's a reporting requirement. Then they have to start looking again on first the ESG framework, second, the materiality and risk. And why the materiality and risk are very important? Because companies, they operate in different sectors. If you look at bank and financial institution, they're probably not involved in the day-to-day ESG matters, but they are financing what activities? Yeah, so the risk and materiality are very important. Then looking at the budget allocation. Yeah, budget allocation is very important. Many companies that I spoke to, they state that they are still recovering from COVID. But S is also part of that. Yeah, so they need to integrate environmental, social, and governance into the whole strategy and business purpose. Then then gradually, of course, the reporting. And with regards to reporting, we talk about baseline. So if they just started, they said this is our baseline. So year on year, we will check. You know, if their baseline carbon is say 1 million tons, next year have you reduced? So that's how the monitoring works. So I think that's really driven by governance.
Briefly, can I just add 2 points? Number one, in terms of the governance, specifically for Tenaga Nasional, I think as mentioned just now, board is responsible. And in the case of Tenaga Nasional, we have the board audit committee, board risk committee, and CEO himself is driving this, supported by the management council. In our case, it's known as Sustainability and Energy Transition Council, where we have monthly meeting to look in terms of our initiative addressing ESG and sustainability. In terms of there's a question in terms of how do we actually gauge? Yeah, we have this materiality as mentioned just now. What are the key things that are impacting our stakeholders? And in our case, Tenaga Nasional, every year we look in terms of, we analyze in terms of impact assessment, the things that we have done impacting various stakeholders. And from there we understand, we take note in terms of what are the gaps that we can push further. And I can assure you this is something not just in writing. For the last 1 month, myself and my team has been grilled by board members looking at the details and tough questions coming from various stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Perhaps to wrap up today's panel discussion, just anything else, Michael, on your side to share before your last closing remarks?
Well, it is an evolving process, and so what the gentleman asked of actions in terms of governance. That's why we also measure not only the structures but also the effectiveness of governance activities. And the whole industry is not standing still. So the requirements are changing. The rating agencies are changing their weighting systems, and it's all towards the ultimate goal for a sustainable future for all of us, by the way.
Ariana, your closing remarks?
Yeah, I was saying something very similar, that the transparency on the effectiveness of structures is really important for us. And when we talk about effectiveness, most of the things were already mentioned, like risks and indicators or impact analysis, materiality analysis. But what we also look at is how well does the company follow hard laws, soft laws, like coming from the standard setters, or the own laws. We collected policies which were referred in the reports to understand more about the issue of own laws. And we look at if the own laws are not only vogue things that the companies say in terms of demonstrating that they are a good company, but to align those statements with clear indicators and a clear process how the efforts in those fields will be measured. And I think transparency really is the key. Transparency is a protection from greenwashing, because we look carefully in greenwashing. That's not only saying the untruth, but also exaggerating and also being very weak on your sustainability communication and not and strong on what you are actually doing.
Thank you, Ariana. Dr. Norazila, any closing remarks before we adjourn?
Yeah. Actually, I'm very pleased with the questions and the conversation today. I think with regards to protecting the environment and ensure social harmony, we need awareness from everyone. So please spread the awareness because I think this is a collaborative effort. When we talk, for example, on the Paris Agreement, the global warming 1.5 degree, we are all contributing to it. So, but sometimes the effect may not be seen now, but some part of the world, they already have the impact. For example, in Pakistan, when the southern of Pakistan were affected by flood, and because of the glaciers on Himalaya were melted earlier. So, but we all contributed, but who is going to be hit, we wouldn't know. Yeah, the best we can is to look at scientific evidence, but we all contributed. So we need to spread this awareness to everyone, and it's a collaborative effort. Thank you and congratulations to Perspective and to Michael and Ariana. Thank you very much.
Dr. Fadzil?
This is a very important matters, ESG and sustainability, which cannot be achieved overnight. That's why I mentioned that this is something, a journey for Tenaga Nasional. And in addition to following the guidelines, compliance for Bursa requirements, GRI, WEF, sustainability, meeting the SDGs, etc. But the key thing is the stakeholders. And that's why we do conduct impact assessments so that we can understand how actually we create this value to you and importance in terms of the impact of ESG. And in addition to that, as part of our engagement, just to quickly to inform that Tenaga Nasional is organizing Energy Transition Conference early October. So later on we will share with you the details. Please do join our conference. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. To wrap up today's session, on behalf of the team at Perspective Strategies, I would like to thank each and every one of you for being here this afternoon. If we continue to ask questions, we'll be sitting here until really late evening, but I want to spare you guys from traffic jam and let you all go home earlier. But most importantly, I wanted to emphasize, why are we talking about sustainability? Sometimes we hear corporate comms, people say, ayo, another new thing. But to me, this is really the most exciting component of it all. We have always been accused as communications professionals, there's no substance in what we communicate. Sustainability and ESG is really providing us the substance. It provides us with something measurable. We're talking something that's really relevant to society, to all your target audience, stakeholders. This is the best time to be in communication because we will be championing something meaningful so that our children will inherit the planet as well. So thank you very much. With that, on behalf of the team, thank you for coming here today.
All right, thank you everyone for your question. It is indeed very encouraging to see the interest and responses by all of you. Can the panelists please remain on stage for a short photo op? Before we end the evening, I would like to invite Prof. Muhammad Said Bani, PRCA Malaysia President, Founder and Managing Director of BZB Consult to share his closing remarks.
Thanks, Rina. I was just telling Andy, after all that, I've got to give a closing remark. Thank you very much, Andy. Anyway, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. First and foremost, allow me to congratulate Andy, the Perspective Strategies team, for organizing this very important event in collaboration with Global ESG Monitor. This much desired knowledge sharing session serves to highlight the increasing recognition of the importance of sustainability in improving quality of our lives, protecting the ecosystem, and preserving natural resources for future generations to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I'm particularly proud and humbled to be invited by Perspective Strategies to be part of this event, as it marks the launch of the first ever global ESG Monitor Report of Malaysia. This independent research initiative has analyzed the ESG transparency of companies to provide us with a powerful tool for benchmarking and driving continuous improvement towards sustainability and ESG excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, much has already been said just now about sustainability and ESG by our learned guests this afternoon. Organizations have begun to place considerable importance on this area in terms of budget and other resources. Yet, there is still a sense of general apathy among the workforce, our immediate communities, and society at large. Organizations' reports, timelines, strategies, and implementation plans with targeted goals may be futile if not embraced by our communities. The world at large may not care if their energy is sustainable, as long as they get their energy. Global warming and rising sea levels may be a concern, but to them may not be as intrusive as issues like family illness, debts, price of petrol, and taxes. Herein lies a very vital aspect of sustainability and sustainable practices, which is effective communication. While ESG communications vary among different firms and industries, its essence always boils down to three pillars: corporate goals, business expertise, and daily practices. In order to communicate sustainability, organizations must do sustainability first. There should not be any greenwashing, a marketing tactic some organizations use to lure environmentally conscious customers despite their products or services being anything but. Communication about the environment, also social sustainability, should only come after you have done something about it. And it's okay if something is in progress. After all, sustainability takes time, and as long as we put our efforts into it, we will all be fine, hopefully, in the future. So anyway, in addition, a common misconception about concept of ESG is all about disclosure and only relevant to listed companies. That's what a lot of people think ESG is all about. When we provide communication services, we often hear that organizations do not have enough resources to do ESG reports, simply equating ESG to ESG reporting or disclosure. ESG means more than that. It involves a continuous assessment and improvement of all three pillars I mentioned earlier in daily operations. In other words, companies can execute ESG practices, for instance, ensuring integrity, product safety and quality, and protecting employee rights, which are all considered issues companies of any size must comply with. These mark the starting point of one's ESG journey, which can further extend to a wide variety of other areas. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall not go on further. I just hope the discussions this afternoon had been inspiring and has sparked new ideas. As we approach the end of this enlightening afternoon, allow me to again express my gratitude to Andy, where are you to Andy, and the Perspective Strategies team, also for roping BZB in, and also to Global ESG Monitor, U-Mobile, the esteemed panel of speakers, and all participants for making this event a success. I sincerely hope and urge all attendees to continue the conversations we have had today, to collaborate, innovate, and drive positive changes in your respective industry. Sustainability and ESG must be at the forefront of our decision-making and business practices, not only for the betterment of society and the planet, but also to ensure long-term success and growth of our business. Thank you for all your effort and participation and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Syed Bani. Please remain on stage as Andy will present you with a memento as a special thanks to BZB Consult as one of our sponsors today. Next, I would like to invite Tiffany Chew, U-Mobile Head of Communications and Sustainability, on stage to receive your memento. Thank you to U-Mobile as one of our sponsors today. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Nurmazila Mazan and IR Dr. Muhammad Fazil Muhammad Siam on stage to receive your memento. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our first Sustainability Perspectives. Don't forget to download the Global ESG Monitor Malaysia Regional Report 2022, and you can do so by scanning the QR code on screen right now. We hope to see more of you in our next engagement, and we really appreciate your endless support towards ESG initiatives in Malaysia. Please help yourself to the food and drink served on the left side of the room. And once again, on behalf of Perspective Strategy, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We hope you have benefited from the learnings and sharing session by our expert. Till the next time, safe drive and have a good evening. Thank you.